Welcome, everyone. We are talking about why transitions overwhelm even smart, capable people. We are going to be exploring different concepts around executive functioning, adaptability, resilience, and navigating change more effectively. And one of the things that is really important to understand here is that success in one environment does not automatically prepare us for the next. Flower. Okay. So what are we going to be covering today? So the first section, we're going to be really understanding transitions, what's actually happening during transitions. What do we mean by transitions? When we're talking about transitions as a little preview today, we're not talking about more of the micro transitions, like I leave this room right after. We are going to be talking about larger life transitions that we go through. The second section that we're going to be diving into is why do transitions overwhelm us? So, why do transitions destabilize even highly capable people? The third piece will be navigating transitions more effectively. So, how do we build these adaptive systems that support resilience through change? And then the last piece will be applying this across life stages. So, what does this look like for students, parents, and adults? So, why does this suddenly feel so hard? So you're not alone if any of these little quotes sound familiar. I used to be able to handle this, and for some reason I can't now. They're smart. Why are they struggling now? Or I know what I should do. Why can't I consistently do it? And why does this change just completely derail me? And so you're not alone because transitions often expose challenges that were previously hidden or quietly compensated for. It's a different set of skills to navigate change. And those are the skills that we're really going to be diving into today. And so, through this first section, understanding transitions, what's happening when we move from one environment to the next, one situation to the next, one life stage to the next? So the first really important piece here, and this is exploring that highly capable people aspect, is intelligence is not the same as adaptability. You can be highly intelligent, but change can throw you for such a loop that it looks like you're not intelligent. And so, what's happening in these status quo environments or situations when we're stable, when things are the same? There often are clear expectations with predictable routines that have been practiced and established. There often is some form of external accountability, which often is a strategy that was put in place. There are pre built systems or systems that you built and didn't even realize that you were building. And then there's working compensation strategies. So when I say compensation, it might not be a long-term skill development, but you found compensatory ways of navigating current demands. But then when transitions occur, those demand us to tap into a lot of adaptability skills, self-management skills, flexibility and reflection, to trial and error, seeing what works, trying something new. It taps into the need for resilience and then recalibration. And so intelligence alone cannot replace all of these adaptive skills. And so for many people, highly capable people, they're so used to relying on their intelligence to help them out of problems, help solve challenges. But they're not that same set of skills, that intelligence does not set up for success to navigate the challenges that come up with transition. So transitions are not just new situations. What really is happening when we're talking about life transitions is that many things are changing at once. So the environment is changing. It could literally just be the physical space, routines, structure changes. Relationships can change, social expectations, accountability from others, support from others. Your identity can be changing, your role, your purpose, your self perception, and the demands placed on you can be changing, the workload, independence, and decisions that you need to make. And so, what really is happening is this concept of transition load. And we're going to talk about this when we're talking about strategies to navigate transitions. Is that transitions become overwhelming when too many things are changing all at once because our brains like consistency. And so when there's a lot of things changing, it almost taps a little bit into our fight or flight response where we're worried that something's going to go wrong. And that state of anxiety of having to constantly look over your back, like, did I get all my ducks in row? The more areas that our brain is preoccupied with making sure that everything is stable and okay, the more stressful it is and the harder it is to navigate. So, a big piece with transitions and highly intelligent and capable individuals, that intelligence can actually delay feedback on these adaptive systems necessary for transition. It delays feedback on if you have them or don't, and it delays feedback on what you may need to work on. So, highly intelligent people often process information quickly and improvise effectively in the moment and current situations. They infer patterns rapidly. Intelligent people can figure things out in the moment and compensate under pressure. But those types of strategies work when we are able to hyper focus on a problem. Other things are stable. But what this does is this is overcompensating for the development of planning systems, reflective habits, self monitoring skills, sustainable routines, or adaptive problem solving. And the reason is because we're always kind of under pressure figuring it out because we don't have to worry about everything else changing. And so rather than thinking of long-term establishment of adaptive skills, it's very focused on the here and now of solving immediate problems. And so a key insight here is that success can delay the need to examine process weaknesses until a transition makes them unavoidable. And so, what is a great strength in a predictable known environment can actually overcompensate and prevent us from developing the system strategies and tools needed to navigate change. So, this concept of it worked before, so why isn't it working now? So, some of these common compensation strategies that we tap into is relying on urgency and adrenaline. Think of that, you have something due tomorrow and using that adrenaline to get it done. Reminders and support from others. You build in these systems without even necessarily realizing that you're relying on others to support you. It kind of happens without realizing, without knowing that that is part of your strategy. Rigid routines are overworking, improvisation under pressure, and avoiding tasks until pressure builds. And so all of these are compensation strategies that do work when we have minimal change, minimal problem solving that we need to do, and minimal adaptability being called for. But transitions add in on top of that more ambiguity, a greater need for independence and relying on yourself because and this isn't just for like the transition to college, which is a major transition. Think in the workforce. You may have developed systems, compensatory strategies of relying on coworkers to help remind you or set you up for success. But now in that transition, you're not going to have that same support network in a new job. There is often increased complexity. So rather than addressing one problem, we might have to address a lot of different problems in a lot of different routes. And higher emotional regulation demand. The more unpredictable situations there are, the higher the load and pressure on emotional regulation. Because as I mentioned before, our brains like knowing, like predictability, and the more unknown causes a bit of stress in our system. So what ends up happening with transitions is that old strategies stop scaling. The environment that you were in outgrew the system. So success does not always mean systems are sustainable. So just really reiterating this point that in you may be very successful in an existing environment. So you may be praised for it, grades, outcomes in work, achievement, intelligence, all of these things. but you're not necessarily praised for sustainable systems. So you might not be praised for adaptability, for sustainability, for reflecting on what works and what doesn't work, or building up resilience and strategic adjustment. All of those skills don't necessarily get the spotlight that they should. And so the hidden risk here is really that systems, and I really would almost put the system into quotations here, they can appear to work, but they might be fragile underneath because that system might be very applied to your current setup, not potential future setups. And so transitions are exposing process, not just outcomes. So now it's, oh, I used this system in my prior environment. How do I adapt it to a new environment? And that is a real learning growth mindset that doesn't necessarily get tapped into when your prior setup was very consistent and stable. So now moving into section 2, why do transitions really feel so overwhelming? So understanding the emotional, cognitive, and structural forces at play. So too many things are changing at once, which is really leading to an overload in 3 different parts of ourselves. There's cognitive overload, so there's lots of new environments, shifting expectations, and increased decision making. We have to use our brain a lot. And not only, and I know we're always using our brain, but that concept before, if your brain's always trying to predict what could go wrong, how do I set this up for success? There's a lot that you need to really think strategically about when you're going through transitions. There's also big emotional overload. So our identity shifts, social uncertainty, stress without clear cause. There's just some pressure on our emotional regulation systems. And then more organizational or system overload. So the loss of routine, increased independence, no pre-built structure. And so transitions are overwhelming our capacity when too many systems shift simultaneously. And really what we're thinking about is in coaching, what we do is we have people come to us and they might have 30 different goals they want to work on. And one of the things we have to do is prioritize the most important goals. The challenge with transitions is we have goals in a lot of areas because a lot of things are changing. We have a lot of things we need to work on and set up for success. And that becomes overwhelming when you try to work on too many things at once. So when identity was built around competence, there's this internalized story. So I'm smart, I'll figure it out. See that with a lot of people. Hey, it worked before. My intelligence carried the weight before. Well, it might have, but it might not translate. I work best under pressure. Love that one. It's great. You work best under pressure when you have one thing due tomorrow or when you're in a system with your current boss. But now, when you might have 3 things due at once that you need to get done, is that pressure really going to help you work best? And I don't really need systems. So, transition is exposing inconsistency and poor follow through. It also exposes overwhelm and fragile systems that are not set up to adapt. And adaptability gaps. And so, like when we think about fragile systems, think about um, locations that are prone to earthquakes. They literally build their buildings to be more shouldn't have used an analogy I don't know the best language for, but they're built to survive through earthquakes. They're built in to be able to deal with that stress. And often when we set up systems in very stable environments, they're not stress tests. They're fragile. Emotional responses also often lead to shame, confusion, and burnout, anxiety, and fear of failure, and loss of confidence. And this is very much tied to identity. When we feel that intelligence is what has made us stable and what worked in the past, and that no longer works, it's a little bit of an emotional identity crisis that we can go through. And all of these reactions are very normal and understandable. Again, our bodies and our brains enjoy consistency and predictability. So when we struggle through some transitions, they're not signs of permanent failure. They're just signs that this transition, maybe I didn't prepare for it enough and I'm struggling a bit, but I can bounce back. So the supports we often don't notice until they're gone. So there's this big aspect of reminders from others. This could be parents, colleagues, loved ones, daily nudges, deadline tracking, logistical management. There's a type of memory. It's called relational memory. Read about it once where it's like, oh, I never know how to use the remote control. My partner knows how to use that. That's similar with this concept of reminders from others, in that we just end up relying on these systems, but because it's from others unprompted, they're part of the strategy. And so when we go through transitions, a lot of that is going to change. So if you think about the transition to college, let's say, um, parents might not know if you're not doing your work as a student. So how can they do a daily nudge if they don't see that own feedback that you're not doing something? Or with colleagues or in personal relationships, we can even say, if you're used to that kind of reminder for you to do things from others, seeing them remind you, whatever that might look like, that may disappear in a transition. There's structured schedules also, and you might not realize, more adults might not realize how structured their schedules can be in existing environments, let's say before a work change or like changing careers or moving homes, moving locations. But these predictable routines like school days and work shifts actually help create structure, and it's a support for ourselves. And sometimes in transitions, those things that we relied on without even realizing we relied on can disappear. Familiar environments. Oh, actually, one quick thing on structured schedules. This is such a big deal with people transitioning to work from home environments from those working in office. There's a huge pullback from structured schedules. We had so many adults during COVID that had reached out because they did not even realize how much they relied on those structured schedules from their work environment. There are familiar environments. So, environments, not just like where am I, but also those social dynamics in environments, being able to read the room, establish relationships and routine momentum, or external deadlines, things like hard due dates, visible accountability, and post structure. Again, very using two of the biggest transitions we may see, the college transition. Sometimes there's no due dates on things. You're just expected to do things. Or in a work environment, you may have had a boss that was very supportive in a prior environment that was very clear about what you needed to do and by when. Your next manager, your next boss might not be the same. And this guy doesn't even need to be a career shift. This could also just be getting a promotion. You have a new boss. That is a transition. So really thinking about what you can do, and if you want to share in the chat, feel more than welcome to. That's why I keep looking over just in case anyone leaves anything in the chat. But think about what structures are currently helping you succeed that you may not fully notice. Think about how you actually are accomplishing things. What are all the things that set that up for success? And think about what some of those structures are. And think about if you have an upcoming transition, will those structures be in place still? This is a good lead in when we start thinking about strategies is if those structures aren't in place, how could we put them in place? So one key thing here is you can't fully prepare for every unknown. So you cannot fully know in advance what college will actually feel like. I share this a lot with parents. They try to emphasize so much about what their learned experience was to their kids about college, but it's not the same as actually living through it. You can't fully know what workplace culture will demand, who your colleagues will be, what that setup looks like, what meetings might look like. You might not know how relationships will shift or what challenges will emerge. So, the goal as we're thinking about better navigating transitions is not to eliminate uncertainty. Transitions will always have some unpredictability, and that's okay. But we can limit the amount of uncertainty for sure. We don't have to just accept that. There are definitely some areas that we can create more certainty. Think something as simple as commuting into work. One less thing that you have to worry about is if you do a practice commute into a new job. That way, your first day is not scrambling of, oh my God, this train, I didn't realize how busy it was. Oh my God, all of this stuff, I wasn't prepared. Imagine you just did that a week before you start the new job. Just do a quick run through. That is, and I know that seems like a very micro example, but that's just showing that there are so many little unpredictable things that we can try to make a little more predictable. And we'll talk about that as a previewing strategy. So I'm a big fan of acronyms. And so when we're thinking about adaptive functioning during transitions, and really this can be big or small transitions, I just generated a little acronym here called ADAPT. Missing the T. Why is it on the next slide? Let me just make sure. Ah, oh, there it is. I'm sorry it's not all on the same page. I will scroll down. So with adaptive functioning during transitions, when demands on ourselves, our brains, our emotions, all of this stuff, when those shift, we move through a process. And part of this process is identifying where previous systems are not working. Now, transitions are taxing every stage of this process, but what we want to do is try to follow through with this. And so, with Adept, the first piece is acknowledge. And so, part of this is recognizing that conditions have changed. What has changed? Why isn't my strategies or systems that worked before not working anymore? What has changed? Why my current approach may no longer fit? The second is deal. And so part of this is with some changes, it might not be you need a full overhaul of your current approach. Sometimes it's just a little bit of small adaptations or small discomfort of this isn't how it's supposed to go, a little bit of that rigidity coming out. So there is going to be a bit of tolerating that discomfort of the unknown, of the uncertainty, so that we're able to reflect and think clearly to evaluate options. And that's where we need to move into a bit of this evaluation. We have to assess, does this new situation, this new problem come up? What is this actually demanding from me? Is this a temporary compensatory strategy? Think about commuting to work. That doesn't need a whole overhaul. That might just be, hey, I got to do it once or twice and then I'll be fine. So we need to see whether it's temporary, structural, or does call for an entirely different approach in its entirety. So then it becomes the real decision. Do I persist through this change and transition or this component of change and transition? It's only short term. And so I just got to persist through it a little bit. Let me continue. It's working. It's just some of it's a little uncomfortable about the unknown. I just have to persist though. Or we might need to see that we need a pivot. And so adjust course where it is no longer working. And so one of those examples, maybe you're moving from one work environment to another and you use a calendar system to help track what you need to be doing and where you're going. Maybe at first, when you get into that new environment, it's harder to use that same system. It's harder to use your calendar system because you're still figuring out how to navigate your new workplace. How do people communicate? How do things get added? Who's inviting who to what? All of this stuff. But that might just be a short term transition that we need to navigate and persist through and then reintegrate into our calendaring system. Or we might see that there actually is a pivot necessary, that we have to adapt that calendar system. And maybe rather than relying on a calendar, maybe there's more of a like task management, project management approach that you might be using instead. So just a small example there of persist or pivot. And the last is transition and stabilize. And so this is where either we persist through and we navigate through to a stabilization of those systems, let's say, or we see that we need to recalibrate and transition those systems and then stabilize. So the biggest thing here, though, is transitions do not just require more willpower, they do require more deliberate process, that we need to actually think about it. Because what ends up happening when we rely too much on willpower is we get stuck in this persisting through, and we're not stopping to reflect on maybe we actually need to pivot our strategies. So section 3, navigating transitions more effectively, building adaptive systems that bend without breaking. So sustainable systems are adaptive systems. And so the trap many people do fall into is searching for the perfect planner for this specific environment, chasing the perfect routine, building rigid systems that can't flex. Or one of the more recent ones, I've got to find the perfect app or AI that sets me up for success. But what's important here is that when we have perfect, you can't set something up perfect that will always apply. That aspect, it might be perfect for the current situation, all other variables being equal. But that's not an adaptive system because the second one thing changes, now maybe that perfect system, perfect routine no longer applies to you. So you might feel going to the gym in the morning is your perfect routine, but then maybe you move and you don't have a gym near you that opens as early. Perfect example of perfect. Perfect example of if we get locked into this is my perfect time, perfect morning routine, then when changes and transitions force us to change that, now we get stuck in this mindset of, oh my God, it's not working anymore. My perfect routine isn't working. So, really, what we want to be looking more into is adaptive systems. And these adaptive systems are almost the glue that holds our strategies together. So, very important is this executive function skill of self monitoring, where we reflect on and understand that our systems and strategies that we build for ourselves, our routines that we build for ourselves, are the best they can be right now. But let's reflect so that we are able to see when changing environments happen, is it still working? And by practicing that skill of self monitoring and regular reflection, it's helping give us feedback to know how we may need to adapt. That's why it's one of the most important skills to work on or strategies to develop is building in reflection for ourselves, building in self monitoring. What's working about this? What's not working about this? Is the what's not working about this something that's going to keep coming up? If so, I need to adapt it. Recalibration checkpoints is almost a more sophisticated level of self monitoring, or I don't even want to say sophisticated. It's a more concrete piece of self monitoring and reflection. So, reflection and self monitoring is a lot about us gathering data on what's working and what's not working. But our recalibration checkpoints are more about, hey, let me reflect on the last couple of weeks. Let me see, for this past month, I've tried this strategy. What have I learned from my reflection? Is it working, or do I need to pause and really recalibrate what's going on? Some flexibility and recovery strategies, and iterative problem solving. So the goal we're creating here is not systems that never fail. It's systems that are able to adapt when circumstances change. And so these adaptive systems are not just about an adaptive system around routines. The adaptive systems are, how are we reflecting on what's working for me now, what strategies are working for me now, and develop feedback loops so that we know when we may need to change those systems and strategies. Just a quick check. Okay. A reminder, if anyone does have any questions, even if I don't get to them until the end, feel free to throw them in while they're fresh in your head. So these adaptive systems, as I mentioned, this core piece of self-monitoring is so important, this reflection piece. And so what we're really doing, and this is a big piece in our problem solving model of RISE, and you see RISE here again a little bit, but what we're looking at is recognizing problems. We are strategizing adjustments that may be needed to our systems to adapt to those problems. We are identifying what's working about the system or where we need to adapt, and we're evaluating the effectiveness of that system. Were my adjustments working or not? And a big piece when we're thinking about adaptive systems is the goal is to get us back to a place of feeling stabilized, feeling like we did before the transition. This is about helping us get there. And so the first thing when we're navigating change, setting new routines, developing new systems, we're not going to get to this kind of autopilot mode of those strategies where we don't need to put in a lot of thought. So the first piece is let's find what changes need to be made. We're putting in a lot of effort, and then we double down when we find something that is working for the new environment to that more behavioral component of routine setting and making it second nature. So strong systems do include this built-in reflection loop. So metacognition and self-monitoring aren't just extras here. They are the key mechanism by which systems evolve and as demands evolve. Now, for those that have not attended previous webinars or maybe have forgotten, just we've talked about self-monitoring, but metacognition I threw in here. This is that skill set, that cognitive skill set to be able to reflect and think about how our own brains work, our own cognitive strategies, what our brain's strengths and weaknesses are, how to apply that to developing strategies. This will set me up for success, or no, this probably won't work because my brain works this way. So, okay. So the first real strategy here is really thinking about building in reflection. Now, a second strategy in navigating transitions that's very important is we want to try and reduce the number of things changing at once. So one of the biggest mistakes is waiting until the transition begins to start adapting. So instead, we want to try and begin gradually, shift responsibility slowly, learn routines ahead of time, reduce scaffolding in stages, specific to the college transition, practicing independence as much as possible before college. And the key piece here is fewer simultaneous changes leads to more adaptive capacity. So the classic example with high school students transitioning to college is waking themselves up. So I have spoken to some parents that are still waking their kids up in their senior year of high school, still getting their kids to school, driving them to school, doing everything for them. And so that is something that will be necessary if they go away to college because parents are going to be there. They can start practicing that earlier. That's one of those things. Are we saving that until right when they transition when really we can do that sooner? For a more adult example, if you are changing your shifts at work, why are we going to wait to adjust our sleep schedule and our circadian rhythm till right before? If you're going from a night shift to a morning shift, we want to start that transition of our sleep when we're waking up or when we're going to bed sooner rather than later. So when there's fewer simultaneous changes, you have more adaptive capacity. You're not worrying about the 30,000 things that are different and new. You're worrying about less. You're able to allocate. Well, one thing I think here is it's not necessarily more adaptive capacity, it's more adaptive capacity for the specific changes. Your bandwidth may stay the same, your adaptive capacity may stay the same, but you're able to allocate more of your cognitive effort and attention to less changes. And so each change is getting more of your attention and energy. So just really reiterating, transition should not begin on transition day. So really starting to ask yourself, what can begin changing now? Identify which supports can be gradually reduced or tested. What can be practiced early? So simulate some of those future demands as best you can before they are required. What responsibilities can shift gradually? So build independence through staggered transfer, not sudden removal. And what systems can be tested beforehand? So stress test some of these routines and strategies before the stakes are higher. And so staggering transition significantly improves adaptability outcomes. I sometimes like to think about the analogy of like crossing a bridge. And so the more ropes we can get tossed across the bridge, the more stable that bridge will be. We're able to walk across it with more confidence. And adaptability does improve when we preview. So you might not be able to actually transition certain skills, actually begin doing things, actually putting things in practice. But this concept in education and learning about previewing is really, really important. And so, what is previewing? So, previewing is really just thinking about what changes are going to happen. Maybe you don't know exactly what it looks and feels like, but we can think about it. So, with the example, I'll just give a concrete example before going more into the content on the slide. But if I am changing jobs, if I at least stop and think about who are my colleagues going to be and what is the team? How many colleagues do I actually have? Do I not have any colleagues? Well, I only have a boss. Who are these people? Just thinking about the changing dynamics is helping my brain better. It's helping decrease the uncertainty. There will always be some uncertainty because you haven't lived and breathed it, you haven't spoken to all of these people, that type of stuff. But there can be a decrease in some of the uncertainty. And so previewing reduces the cognitive load of encountering something entirely new. So when an element is familiar, the brain has more bandwidth to adapt to what is unfamiliar. So previewing reduces both uncertainty and cognitive load, making the transition itself feel less overwhelming. So part of this might be visiting environments beforehand. I use the example of going to work, doing the commute before you actually need to go in for your first day. That's a very useful thing. For college students during orientation or when they first move in, I often recommend, why don't you go and find where all of your classes are? You should have your schedule at that point. If you're living off campus, why don't we actually see what getting from the dorm to your classroom will look like? You might discuss expectations, practice some of these routines as best you can, simulate some of the demands, and identify likely obstacles is such a useful strategy in previewing. What could go wrong? The more you know about what could go wrong, the less intimidating that going wrong will be. Because when things totally catch us off guard, totally throws us for a loop. Map supports in advance. What could I lean on? And this is a big thing we do in the college transition, is just helping identify, when this goes wrong, what would you lean on to? And so in more of the adult environment, this is important, even if we think about mental health, right? So you might be moving and you might not have your same mental health supports in place. You might want to navigate, if you're used to having a therapist, if you're changing states, you want to navigate, who might my new therapist be if I needed them to help me through something. So that's just an aspect of mapping some of these supports in advance. Or even if this could be during an onboarding period with a new job, is really thinking about, who do I go to? You can ask HR, who's their resources, in case something comes up. I will say one more thing about mapping supports in advance. It's very hard when you are highly stressed about a transition and a problem that comes up through that transition to stop and think strategically. And so that's why mapping supports in advance makes it easier to access that when you need it, mapping that out for yourself. So adaptability does require some recalibration. So during transitions, the systems will need adjustment, maybe not major, but they will often need adjustment. That is expected, not a sign of failure. And so revising strategies. So when feedback shows something isn't working, let's adjust early. Let's not be stubborn all the time. Expect some setbacks, build recovery into the plan, not just the goal. Rebuild intentionally, use reflection to redesign, not just patch. And so resilience is not perfection, it's the ability to adapt repeatedly over time. And so really understanding expect setbacks. When you are doing something new for the first time, don't place the expectation on yourself that you're going to do it perfectly the first time. Leave a little wiggle room for yourself of it might not be optimal. And when it's not, what do I do? How do I preview how I'm going to adapt? It's a big thing and for transition to college or transition to um, high school for middle school or transition to a new job is you might get some harsh feedback the first time you do something. But what are our backup plans on how to learn from that and adapt? How can we preview and overcompensate in the beginning? So now section 4, applying this across the life stages. So transition challenges do affect everyone, students, parents, and adults navigating change. So just some transitions across the lifespan, middle school to high school. So new structure, higher stakes, shifting identity. It counts now. Less so now. Middle schoolers are like taking APs and things for college as well, which is insane. But it is what it is. It's the environment they're in. But in general, that can be a big transition in workload. Um, High school to college, huge one. College to workforce, and then career and life changes, relocation, parenting, health changes, remote work. Huge transition we haven't talked about. Having a kid. It's a very big transition. And so these are transitions that are occurring throughout the life. And they're not just limited to youth, they really do surface at every major life stage. So for parents supporting transition readiness, some key reflection questions for you to think about is what supports currently exist behind the scenes? What might you be doing that your kids don't even know you're doing for them? And it's really important to help your kids start understanding what you are doing for them because when that structure disappears, they don't even know what's wrong. They think it's something wrong with them. Which skills are truly independent? Where are systems fragile or hidden, and what can begin transition gradually now? So independence develops more successfully through gradual transfer than sudden removal of support. For adults navigating change, struggling during the transition does not mean you're failing. The environment changed faster than your systems did. What's great here is think of like evolution as an analogy here, a metaphor here. When their environments change too quickly, evolution can't run its course because the adaptability of genes don't keep up with the environmental changes. And so old systems may longer fit, and those new demands require new strategies, not just harder effort. That's where I see too many people get stuck. Rather than changing the systems or strategies, they think just to try harder. Intelligence doesn't eliminate executive function demands. So everyone does need these adaptive systems regardless of capability. And it's really important as an adult that you don't realize that you need these things until it's often too late. And so really trying to be more proactive in setting these up, not because you need them right now, but because you don't want the fear of transition and adaptability to hold you back. And recalibration is normal. So adjusting your systems is a sign of self-awareness, not weakness. And so really you can reflect yourself and think about what worked before that no longer works now. And maybe it's not me that's the problem, it's the system that needs to change and adapt. So, as a little bit of a some of the summary here is navigating transitions more effectively by leaning into identifying hidden supports before they disappear. Big metacognition piece there that taps into a lot of metacognition. Thinking about what sets you up for success and then identifying if through a transition, those will still be there. Reduce simultaneous changes, staggered transitions where possible. Begin transitions early, so don't wait for the transition day. Preview upcoming demands, so reduce the novelty and cognitive load. Build adaptive systems that are flexible, reflective, and recalibrating. And to normalize that recalibration. Expect iteration, expect never to achieve perfection, but to always strive for it through adapting. So the goal is not to eliminate the uncertainty, it's to build the systems that do help us adapt, reflect, and recalibrate. So transitions don't expose a lack of intelligence, they expose overloaded systems, hidden dependencies, and underdeveloped adaptability. And these things can be built. And adaptability is a skill, so it can be strengthened intentionally at any age, at any stage with practice and focused effort. So I will, just as you're thinking about, take a moment with one of these prompts. Think back to your hardest transition. What transition challenged you the most and why? Reflect on that transition. What was challenging about that? And that is the beginning to understand where there might be some gaps in adaptive systems that you can focus on. What stopped working? So, which systems or strategies broke down during that transition? With hindsight's 2020, what could have been changed or adapted sooner? Hidden supports. So, what scaffolding disappeared that you hadn't noticed before? And how can we maybe replace that independently in ourselves? And then what's your next transition? So what can we begin to start preparing for gradually right now? And so thank you all for being here. I really do appreciate it. I think I did not leave my contact on this slide, but I will share with everyone that may be watching. My email is casey@nfil.net. Our website is nfil.net. We have a lot of resources on there. You could go to our website to schedule a time to chat with us as well. And I really do appreciate everyone attending. For all those that attended live, I appreciate any feedback. And please do share it with anyone else. Same to those who are watching this after the fact on YouTube. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, that's amazing. You're one of the very few, and I appreciate it. And with that,